The year was 1998. While the world was celebrating the end of the millennium, somewhere in America, a family was living their worst nightmare. A young girl had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions that would torment investigators and family members for years to come. But what they discovered 3 years later would shake even the most seasoned detectives to their core. This is the story of a disappearance that defied explanation, a search that consumed countless resources, and a discovery that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. What started as a missing person case would evolve into something far more sinister, revealing the darkest corners of human nature and the lengths some people will go to hide their crimes. On what seemed like an ordinary evening in late 1998, 15-year-old Sarah was last seen leaving her part-time job at a local diner. She had been working there for 6 months, saving money for college while maintaining excellent grades at school. Sarah was the kind of teenager every parent hopes to raise: responsible, kind-hearted, and full of dreams about her future. She wanted to become a teacher, just like her mother, and had already been accepted to her dream university with a partial scholarship. The walk from the diner to her house was barely 2 miles, a route Sarah had taken countless times before. The small town where she lived was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors were left unlocked and children played in the streets until dark. Crime was virtually non-existent, and the biggest scandal in recent memory had been when the mayor was caught having an affair with his secretary. This was not the kind of place where teenage girls simply disappeared. When Sarah didn't come home that night, her parents initially weren't worried. She was a responsible teenager, and they thought perhaps she had gone to a friend's house to study or had decided to stay late at work. But as the hours turned into morning and Sarah still hadn't returned, their concern grew into panic. Phone calls to her friends yielded nothing. No one had seen her since she left work the previous evening. The local police were called, and what began as a routine missing person report quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. Detective Mark Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of the force, was assigned to lead the case. He had handled missing person cases before, but something about Sarah's disappearance felt different from the start. Good kids from good families didn't just vanish into thin air, especially not in a town where the most serious crime was usually petty theft or drunk driving. The investigation began with the basics. Sarah's route home was retraced multiple times, with officers walking every inch of the path she would have taken. They interviewed her coworkers at the diner, her teachers at school, her friends, and anyone who might have had contact with her in the days leading up to her disappearance. What they found was consistent with everything her parents had told them. Sarah was a model teenager with no enemies, no boyfriend troubles, and no reason to run away. The manager at the diner, Mrs. Patterson, had been the last person to see Sarah alive. She remembered that Sarah had seemed perfectly normal that evening, perhaps even more cheerful than usual because she had just received news that her scholarship had been increased for the following year. Sarah had clocked out at exactly 9:47 p.m., said goodbye to Mrs. Patterson, and walked out the front door with her backpack slung over her shoulder and her car keys in her hand. Wait, her car keys. This detail would become crucial as the investigation progressed. Sarah had driven to work that evening in her mother's old Honda Civic, but the car was found the next morning in the diner's parking lot, exactly where she had left it. The keys were missing, and there were no signs of struggle around the vehicle. This ruled out the possibility that Sarah had made it to her car before something happened. Whatever had occurred, it had taken place somewhere between the diner's front door and her car, a distance of perhaps 50 feet. As news of Sarah's disappearance spread through the small town, volunteers began organizing search parties. Hundreds of people turned out to help, combing through forests, fields, and abandoned buildings. The local high school organized fundraisers to help with search costs, and Sarah's photograph appeared on missing person flyers throughout the state. The FBI was called in after the first week, bringing with them resources and expertise that the local police department simply didn't have. Agent Jennifer Walsh from the FBI's Missing Persons Unit took charge of the federal investigation. She had seen cases like this before, teenagers who disappeared without explanation, leaving behind devastated families and communities, but she also knew the statistics. The first 48 hours were critical in missing person cases, and those had long since passed. With each day that went by, the chances of finding Sarah alive diminished significantly. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate area. Sarah's computer was examined for any signs of online predators or suspicious communications, but nothing was found. Her phone records were analyzed, revealing only calls to family members and close friends in the days before her disappearance. There were no strange purchases on her bank account, no unusual behavior reported by anyone who knew her, and no indication that she had been planning to leave town. One of the most frustrating aspects of the case was the complete lack of witnesses. Despite the diner being located on a relatively busy street, no one reported seeing anything unusual that evening. The security camera at the gas station across the street had been broken for weeks, and the diner itself had no exterior cameras. It was as if Sarah had simply walked out the front door and vanished into thin air. As weeks turned into months, the investigation began to slow down. Leads were followed up and discarded, theories were proposed and debunked, and gradually, the intense media attention began to fade. Sarah's parents never gave up hope, continuing to organize search parties and keep her case in the public eye, but even they could feel the momentum slipping away. The police assured them that the case remained active, but with no new leads and no physical evidence, there was little they could do except wait for a break. Detective Rodriguez found himself thinking about Sarah's case even when he was off duty. He had 2 daughters of his own, both close to Sarah's age, and the thought of them disappearing kept him awake at night. He reviewed the case files countless times, looking for any detail that might have been overlooked, any connection that hadn't been made. But each time, he came to the same frustrating conclusion. They had done everything right, followed every lead, and still had nothing to show for it. The first-year anniversary of Sarah's disappearance was marked by a vigil. In the town square, hundreds of people attended, holding candles and sharing memories of the bright, cheerful girl who had touched so many lives. Her parents spoke about keeping hope alive and never giving up the search for their daughter. But privately, they were beginning to prepare themselves for the possibility that they might never know what happened to Sarah. It was during the second year that the case took an unexpected turn. A convicted burglar named Tommy Martinez was arrested for breaking into homes in a neighboring county. During questioning, he mentioned that he had information about a missing girl from Sarah's town. When Detective Rodriguez interviewed him, Martinez claimed that he had seen Sarah on the night she disappeared, but not near the diner. According to his story, he had seen her walking along a rural road about 10 miles outside of town, seemingly alone and distressed. This information didn't match with any of the known facts of the case. There was no reason why Sarah would have been in that area, and no way she could have gotten there without her car. Martinez's story changed each time he was questioned, and eventually, it became clear that he was either lying or had mistaken someone else for Sarah. The lead was abandoned, but it had raised hopes among Sarah's family and friends, only to dash them once again. As the investigation approached its third year, Detective Rodriguez was promoted to sergeant and given responsibility for overseeing multiple cases. While Sarah's case remained officially open, he was no longer able to dedicate the same amount of time to it. Agent Walsh had been reassigned to other cases as well, and the FBI's involvement had been reduced to minimal monitoring. For all practical purposes, the active investigation had come to an end. It was then, in early 2001, that everything changed. A construction crew working on a new housing development about 15 miles from town made a discovery that would shock the entire community. While excavating the foundation for a new home, one of the workers noticed something unusual in the soil. At first, he thought it might be animal bones, but as more earth was carefully removed, it became clear that they had found human remains. The construction site was immediately cordoned off, and the coroner was called to the scene. What they uncovered over the next several hours would provide answers to the mystery of Sarah's disappearance. But those answers would raise new questions that were even more disturbing than the original crime. The remains were indeed human, and preliminary examination suggested they belonged to a teenage female. But it wasn't just the discovery of bones that shook investigators, it was the condition in which they were found. The remains had been carefully arranged in what appeared to be a ritualistic manner, with personal items placed around the body in a specific pattern. There were signs that the burial site had been visited multiple times over the years, with evidence of candles being burned and flowers being left. DNA testing confirmed what everyone already suspected. The remains belonged to Sarah, but the forensic evidence told a story that was far more horrifying than anyone had imagined. The condition of the bones suggested that Sarah had been held captive for an extended period before her death. There were signs of malnutrition and evidence of repeated trauma. Most disturbing of all, the forensic pathologist determined that Sarah had likely been alive for several months after her disappearance. The discovery of Sarah's remains reopened the investigation with renewed urgency. The fact that someone had been visiting the burial site regularly suggested that her killer might still be in the area. The ritualistic arrangement of the remains and personal items indicated a level of psychological disturbance that made investigators fear that Sarah might not have been this person's only victim. A new task force was assembled, combining local police, FBI agents, and forensic specialists. The burial site was excavated completely, with every square inch of soil being sifted for evidence. What they found painted a picture of a killer who was organized, methodical, and deeply disturbed. Hidden beneath Sarah's remains were items that didn't belong to her: jewelry, clothing, and personal effects that suggested other victims. The investigation now focused on identifying these other potential victims and building a profile of the killer. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in to examine the crime scene and provide insights into the type of person capable of such acts. Their preliminary assessment was chilling. They were dealing with a serial killer who had been operating in the area for years, possibly decades. As investigators dug deeper into the evidence, they began to notice patterns that connected Sarah's case to several other missing person reports from surrounding counties. Young women who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, cases that had gone cold due to lack of evidence or leads. The task force began to wonder if they were dealing with someone who had been perfecting their methods over many years. The breakthrough came when forensic experts found fingerprints on one of the items buried with Sarah's remains. The prints belonged to Harold Vance, a 48-year-old maintenance worker who had been employed by the county for over 20 years. His job gave him access to rural areas and remote locations, and he had been working in Sarah's town around the time of her disappearance. When investigators examined Vance's background, they found a man who had managed to hide in plain sight for decades. He was unmarried, lived alone in a remote cabin, and had no close friends or family. His co-workers described him as quiet and unremarkable, the kind of person who blended into the background and was easily forgotten. But beneath this unremarkable exterior was a predator who had been stalking and killing young women for years. The arrest of Harold Vance sent shockwaves through the community. This was someone who had been among them all along, someone who had attended town meetings and shopped at local stores while hiding his monstrous secret. The investigation of his property revealed evidence of multiple crimes, including items belonging to at least 6 other young women who had been reported missing over the past 15 years. During questioning, Vance eventually confessed to Sarah's murder, as well as the deaths of 5 other women. His confession revealed the horrifying details of what Sarah had endured during her final months. He had abducted her that night as she walked to her car, using a stun gun to incapacitate her before transporting her to his remote cabin. There, he had held her prisoner, subjecting her to unspeakable horrors before finally killing her when he grew tired of his victim. The confession provided closure for Sarah's family, but it also opened up new wounds. Knowing that their daughter had suffered for months before her death was almost more than they could bear. The fact that her killer had been living and working in their community all along, that they had probably encountered him dozens of times without knowing what he was capable of, added another layer of trauma to their grief. Harold Vance was charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of kidnapping and sexual assault. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he eventually pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He was spared the death penalty only because prosecutors wanted to avoid putting the victims' families through the ordeal of a lengthy trial. The case had a profound impact on everyone involved in the investigation. Detective Rodriguez, now a sergeant, struggled with guilt over not having solved the case sooner. He wondered if there were clues they had missed, leads they should have followed more aggressively. The fact that Sarah had suffered for months while they were searching for her haunted him for years afterward. Agent Walsh was equally affected by the case. She had seen many horrific crimes during her career, but something about Sarah's case stuck with her. Perhaps it was the youth and innocence of the victim, or the calculated evil of the perpetrator, but she found herself unable to forget the details of what had happened. She eventually left the FBI and became a victim's advocate, working to help families of missing persons navigate the complex world of criminal investigations. The discovery also had a lasting impact on the small town where Sarah had lived. The sense of safety and security that had defined the community for generations was shattered. Parents became more protective of their children, and the trust that had allowed neighbors to look out for each other was replaced by suspicion and fear. The town would never be quite the same. For Sarah's parents, the discovery of their daughter's remains brought a mixture of relief and renewed grief. On one hand, they finally had answers to the questions that had tormented them for 3 years. They knew what had happened to their daughter, and her killer had been brought to justice. But on the other hand, learning the horrible details of Sarah's final months was almost unbearable. They found some comfort in knowing that Sarah's case had led to the identification of other victims and the capture of a serial killer who might have continued his crimes indefinitely. In a way, their daughter's death had prevented other families from experiencing the same tragedy. It was small consolation for their enormous loss, but it gave some meaning to Sarah's suffering. The case also highlighted the importance of never giving up on missing person investigations. If not for the chance discovery by the construction crew, Harold Vance might never have been caught. Sarah's case would have remained unsolved, and he would have been free to continue killing. The discovery served as a reminder to law enforcement agencies that cold cases should never be forgotten. That advances in forensic technology and unexpected developments can breathe new life into even the most hopeless investigations. In the years that followed, Sarah's story became part of law enforcement training programs, used as an example of how serial killers can hide in plain sight, and the importance of looking beyond the obvious when investigating disappearances. Her case also contributed to changes in how missing person investigations are conducted, with greater emphasis on preserving evidence and maintaining active investigations even when leads run cold. Today, more than 2 decades after Sarah's disappearance, her case continues to haunt those who were involved in the investigation. Detective Rodriguez, now retired, still thinks about the case and wonders if there were other victims they never identified. The construction worker who found Sarah's remains has never forgotten the sight of that carefully arranged burial site, and he still has nightmares about what he discovered that day. The horror of what happened to Sarah serves as a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, hiding behind ordinary facades and mundane routines. It's a sobering lesson about the darkness that some humans are capable of, and the importance of remaining vigilant even in the safest seeming communities. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love and determination. Her parents never gave up hope, never stopped searching, and never allowed their daughter to be forgotten. Their persistence and the dedication of the investigators who worked on her case ultimately led to justice, not just for Sarah, but for the other victims whose lives were cut short by the same monster. The case remains one of the most disturbing and haunting investigations in the region's history, a reminder that sometimes the truth is more horrifying than any fiction we could imagine. But it's also a story of justice eventually being served, of families finding closure, and of communities coming together in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Sarah's legacy lives on through the changes her case brought about in law enforcement procedures and the lives she saved by helping to capture a serial killer. While her story ended in tragedy, the impact of her case has helped protect countless other potential victims from sharing her fate. In death, she became a guardian angel for others who might have fallen prey to the same evil that claimed her life. The investigators who worked on her case will never forget the lessons they learned from Sarah's disappearance and the discovery that haunted them all. Her story serves as a constant reminder of why their work matters and why they must never give up on seeking justice for victims and their families, no matter how much time has passed or how cold the trail has become.